In this lecture, we are going to study about input and output in C++. So we will see how to take input and also give output in C++ programming language. Alright, so let's get started. So coming to input and output in C++, the C++ language does not define any statements to do input or output. So by default, C++ language does not define any statement for doing the input or output. Then how do we do input or output in C++? Instead, C++ includes an extensive standard library that provides input, output, and many other facilities. So though C++ language does not have or define any statements to do input and output, it is having something known as a standard library. Now what is a standard library? It is an extensive library that provides many facilities, and one of them is the input-output facility. So using the standard library from C++, we are going to do the input and output. So we will see how to do that. So for the purpose of input and output, we will make use of something known as the iostream library. So iostream stands for input output stream. And remember, this is a library that is a part of the standard library that we have in C++. So this is the one that will provide us with the facilities for doing input and output. So we will see how it is done. So coming to the iostream library, the iostream library is made up of two types. One is the istream and other one is the ostream. So that is why IO. So what is the istream? Istream is the input stream that is used for taking inputs. And ostream, it stands for output stream that is used for giving outputs. And now we understood I is input and O is output. Now what is this stream? What do we mean by stream? So stream is nothing but a sequence of characters read from or written to an input-output device. So any sequence of characters that we are writing to or reading from an input-output device is known as a stream. Now I hope you understood what is the meaning of input stream and output stream. So these two make up the iostream library. Okay, so we have understood the iostream library. Now how is actually input and output done? Let's see that. So the standard input and output objects is what will help us to actually do the input and output. So let's see what are they. So the iostream library defines 4 input-output objects. Let's see what they are. Number 1, we have CIN, which is pronounced as CIN. So we call this as CIN, and this is used for standard input. So it stands for console input and we pronounce it as CIN, and this is the object that we are going to use for taking inputs. And then secondly, we have COUT, which we pronounce as cout, and it stands for console output, and this is the standard output object. So this object is what is going to help us for giving the outputs. Then we have CERR, pronounced as cerr, which is the standard error object. Now this is used for standard errors. And then the last one is CLOG, which is pronounced as clog, and this is used for general information like log information and all. Okay, so the most important two things here are CIN and cout. So the CIN, this is of the type istream. So we said that istream and ostream, they are types in the iostream library. So we have discussed about what is types already in one of the previous lectures. So the CIN is actually an object of the istream type. So that's what you have to remember. And then cout, cerr and clog, they are all of the type ostream. So again, ostream is a type that is there in the iostream library. And then the cout, cerr and clog, they are objects of the type ostream. So these are the main objects that we need to keep in mind. CIN, cout, cerr and clog. And CIN and cout are the most important ones and the most common ones that we are going to extensively use in this course as well. So let's take an example program making use of this CIN and cout in order to see how they work and how their syntax looks like and how we have to write it in a C++ code. So coming to this example, here we have written a complete code, a complete program, and here we see that the first line is include iostream. So here we see that the first line is include iostream, then int main, then we see here std, and then we see that we have 2 colons, and then it's written here cout, and we have 2 angle brackets, and within quotes it is written enter 2 numbers, and we close the quotes, and here again we have these 2 angle brackets, and it's written here std and colon colon end l, and then semicolon. And here we have int n1 equal to 0, n2 equal to 0, then std cin n1, n2, and then std cout, the sum of n1 and n2 is n1 plus n2, std endline again and return 0. So let us see what are the meanings of all these things written in this program. So let's start from the top itself. So here it is written hash include, and within angle brackets it is written iostream. So what is this? This is the header. In every C++ program we will be mentioning the header. So iostream is the header that we are going to make use here, and iostream is the one that contains the library that enables the cout and cin and all those objects. So that is why we have to include this iostream library. So I'm telling my compiler that include this iostream header in my program. Then here we have int main. So what is this? This is the main function. So we have already discussed about main function. So every C++ program will be having a main function. So here we have a main function and the return type is int. So we have also seen about this in the previous lectures. Okay. Then next, here we see within this curly braces, the body of that function is there. The function body is over here. So this is what is actually going to perform the operation, whatever is going to be done. So let's see. So here we have std cout. So what is this? This is the standard output object. So we already studied that cout is the standard output object. Now why am I writing std cout? Now std is the standard library. So as we already said in the beginning of this lecture, C++ does not define any statements for doing input or output, but it includes an extensive library that is a standard library. So this cout is actually present within the standard library. So we are telling that use the cout that is present in the standard library. And this colon that we see here, this is known as the scope operator. So we are telling that use the cout that is within the scope of the standard library. So this cout is going to print something on the screen. Now here we see these two angle brackets that are opening to the right. So this is the output operator. So after cout you have to write this output operator, and after that only you have to mention what you have to print. Okay. Now here it is written enter two numbers. So this is the string literal. That means the actual thing that we are going to print on the screen, and it has to be written within this double quotes. So whatever is written within this double quotes in a cout statement will be printed on the screen as it is. So this is the string literal that will be printed. And here we see again we have this output operator, and it is written here std end l. Now what is this? This is actually a manipulator. Now what do we mean by manipulator? So we see that this is a string and it is just manipulating the stream. So we are actually trying to print something as a stream on the screen, and this manipulator endl stands for end line. So it is manipulating the stream and it is taking the control to the next line. So if you write endl, then it will break from this line and come to the next line on the screen. So that is what we mean by endl. And again we see that std is written here. Why? Because this endl is also defined inside the std library or the standard library. So we are saying that use the end line that is within the scope of the standard library. And why are we using this output operator again? Because we see that the type of data has changed. Till here we were just printing something that we wanted to print on the screen, and we have closed the double quotes. And here what we are trying to put inside this cout is an end line, which is not a string but it is a manipulator. So whenever the type changes, we have to use this output operator again. So that is why this output operator is used again, and then we end the statement with a semicolon. So this entire cout statement, it starts from here and it ends at this semicolon. Okay, so that is the entire cout statement. So what it is essentially going to do, it is going to print on the screen, enter two numbers, and then it is going to take the control to the next line. Okay, now after this we have int n1 equal to 0, n2 equal to 0. Now what are these? These are variable declarations. Now variables are something that we are going to learn in detail in the coming lectures, but just remember for now that variable is something that can store values. And then we are declaring two variables n1 and n2, and they are of the type integer. So they are integer variables, and initially they are holding the values 0, 0. Okay, so int n1 equal to 0, comma, and n2 is also equal to 0. So this comma is telling that this n2 is also an integer and it is equal to 0, and then we end it with a semicolon. Okay, so that is a variable declaration. And then next we have this stdcin, and then we have these two angle brackets that are opening to the left, and then we take n1, and again we have this two angle brackets opening to the left, and then n2. Now what do we mean by this? Now stdcin is the standard input object. So we have already seen that in the previous slide. So we want to take input from the user. So we ask the user here to enter two numbers, and when the user is going to enter those two numbers, we have to store it somewhere. So that will be stored in this n1 and n2. So we are making use of the cin object, and again this cin is within the standard library scope. So that is why we are writing std and this scope operator. And then we have this angle brackets here, which is the input operator. So this is the output operator which will be used in cout, and this is the input operator which we use with cin. So there are two input operators here. So one is for this n1 and another one is for n2. Now what it essentially does still here we ask the user to enter two numbers, and we came to the next line, and then we declared two variables n1 and n2, and then when the user will enter two values from the keyboard, it will be captured by using this cin, and the first value that the user enters will be stored in n1, and after pressing space or enter when he enters the second number, that will be stored inside the variable n2. So that is what it does. Okay. Now we have here a big cout statement, that is std cout, and then it says the sum of n1 and n2 is n1 plus n2, and again n line, and then return 0. So return 0 is nothing but the return statement. Okay, so let's take a look at this cout statement here. So we want to actually print that the sum of and the two numbers that the user has entered is, and then we want to print the actual sum. So that's what we are trying to do here. So cout and then output operator, and I want to print this string on the screen, the sum of. So that is why I put it within double quotes. Now I want to print the first number that the user has entered. Now here we see that it is going to print a variable and not a string. So because of that, I have to use this output operator again. So I put this output operator, and then I will print n1. What is n1? n1 will store the value that the user has entered, and that will be printed on the screen. Okay, and after this I want to print the word and, A-N-D, and. Now when I print and, we see that and is a string, and here it was a variable, so there is a change. Because of that, I have to use the output operator again, and then within double quotes I write and. So whenever you want to print strings as it is, you have to use double quotes. But for variables, we see that we don't have to use the double quotes. Okay, so I print and, then I want to print the second number that the user has entered. So again we see we are going to print a variable, so we have to use the output operator again, and I print n2, and then I want to print the word is, is. So this is again a string which is again different from this variable here. So I use the output operator here again, and I print is. So that is why it is put under double quotes. And then now I want to print the actual sum. So I open the output operator here again, and n1 plus n2. So what will this do? This will actually add n1 and n2, and that sum will be printed there. And again, this is the sum of two variables, so we don't have to put it under double quotes. Okay, now that much will be printed, and again I want to take the control to the next line. Because of that, I open the output operator here again, and std end line. So this will take the control to the next line, and then we close the cout statement with a semicolon. So essentially what it is going to do, if the user has, suppose, let's say entered values 2 and 3, it will print the sum of 2 and 3 is, what is 2 plus 3? 5. Okay, is 5. So that is what will be printed, and then we return 0. So this is the return statement, and I already explained in one of the previous lectures why we need this return statement. Because this main function over here has a return type integer. So we have to return an integer values. So it does not have anything to do with what we are trying to do here, but we have to anyway mandatorily return a value. So that's why we are just returning 0, which is an integer. Okay, so I hope with that you understood the meaning of this program. Okay, so let's take this program and run it using Visual Studio Code, and let's see the output, how it looks like. So here I have my VS Code open. So I'll go to file and open a folder which I have created in my drive called CPP files. You can create one if you don't have, and then select the folder, and I have the CPP files over here, and I'm going to create a new file here, and let's give it some name. Let's call it sum.cpp. Okay, so I press enter, and then we will get this sum.cpp open in our editor here. So here we have to just type the code that we need. So I have copied the code that we just discussed. So let me just paste it here. and I have to save this file. So let me press Ctrl S on my keyboard and it is saved, and now we have to run this program. So for compiling and running this program, I will use the second method that we have discussed in the previous lecture, where we studied about how to compile and run the programs using Visual Studio Code. So I'll go to terminal and I will open a new terminal. Here the new terminal window is loading, and then here the path is correct. It is the cpp files. This is the folder where I have my sum.cpp. So I have to compile the program now. So for compiling, I have to type g++ space and the name of my file, which is sum.cpp. Okay, so I type sum.cpp and I press enter, and we see that there are no errors and the output file got generated, which is named as a.exe, which is the default name of the output file. Now I have to run this output file. So for running the output file, I have to type ./a.exe. Now when I press enter, the program will run, and here it is asking me for two numbers. So we see that the cout statement got executed, enter two numbers, and then this end line statement has taken the control to the next line here. So if you did not give this, then this cursor kind of thing would have been there over here. But since we gave this end line, it came to the new line on the next line. So it is waiting for me to enter two numbers. So let's enter two numbers, let's say 3 and 7. So you can either give 3 space 7 or 3 enter and then 7. Okay, so I have entered two numbers and I will press enter. So when I press enter, what it is going to do is it is going to accept these two integers that I have entered, 3 and 7, and it will store them to n1 and n2. Now I press enter and then it says the sum of 3 and 7 is 10. So what happened is it printed this, the sum of is printed till here. And after that it prints n1. So what is n1? The first value I entered was 3, which was stored in n1. So n1 is 3, so 3 is printed, and then it prints the word and. So and is printed here, and then the next number I entered was 7. So 7 is stored in n2. So it is printing n2 here, so 7 is printed, and then it prints the word is. So is printed here, and then it prints the sum of n1 and n2. So n1 plus n2, that means 3 plus 7, which is equal to 10. So 10 is printed, and then we just send the control to the next line. So this is how we can make use of the cin and cout, which are the standard input and output objects that are used for handling input and output in C++. Okay, so I hope you understood this simple program and how the cout and cin objects work for handling input and output in C++. So remember, cout is for console output, which is for output, and it is within the scope of the standard library. And similarly, cin is for handling input, it is console input, and it is also within the scope of the standard library. And this end line is also a manipulator which is present in the standard library. Alright, so I hope you have understood this program, and with this I hope you have understood how to manage input and output in C++. So I hope this lecture is clear to you. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.